The recording has been engaged so that we can post this for other folks to learn from who aren't able to be on with us today. It is my very great pleasure to launch this webinar, which, as with all the work that we all do in community action, is grounded in the promise. Will you read this along with me at your desks? Community action changes people's lives. It embodies the spirit of hope and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. The work that is being done by the Community Action Board of Santa Cruz County really embodies the spirit of the promise. The reason we're bringing it to you today as part of the Learning Communities Resource Center programming is, look here on your screen and you see the purpose of the LCRC is to analyze community action outcomes, identify effective, promising, and innovative practice models that alleviate the causes and conditions of poverty. As we became aware of the great work that's been going on for some time at the Community Action Board of Santa Cruz County, this is one that we are very excited to bring to you, and I will give you a little foreshadowing. Will be a similar session in depth at our Management Leadership Training Conference coming up soon in San Juan, Puerto Rico at the first of the year. Our team at the partnership is diverse and varied. You heard earlier from Hyacinth, our Zandy McKinley. I am Lil Dupree, and Amy Roberge is also on with us today. We are delighted to do this. And as we get into our webinar, I want to give you a little background on the participants who you should be able to see at the top of your screen. So Sylvia Austerlich, Sylvia, is a board member at Santa Cruz, but is also an intercultural facilitator. She is the founder of Sente Pensante Connections, whose mission is to bridge culture and differences in service of individual transformation, social change, and collective action. She's been a CAP board member since 2016. She was raised in Buenos Aires, Argentina, immigrated to the USA, and has been in Santa Cruz since 1999. She worked for 10 years for the Hospice of Santa Cruz County as a Latino community liaison and a bereavement counselor, providing hospice and grief support, direct services to Spanish-speaking children, youth, and adults, and cultural competence in services and presentations both locally and nationally. In recognition for this equity work, she received the 2014 Community Hero Award from the Community Assessment Project in Santa Cruz County. And she currently works at the University of Santa Cruz, California, Santa Cruz, as a resilience trainer and facilitator, where she teaches a class that she developed on building an inner sanctuary. Second picture you see is Eva Bertram, who is also a board member at CAP Santa Cruz, but is an associate professor in the politics department at UCSC. She studies American politics, public policy, and political economy, and her areas of research focus include economic inequality, poverty, and social policy. She serves on the board of directors at the Community Action Board for Santa Cruz County and on the advisory board at UCSC Blum Center on Poverty, Social Enterprise, and Participatory Governance, which she will tell you a little bit more about. Maria Elena de la Garza is the executive director at CAP Santa Cruz, and he has over 29 years of experience in nonprofit work. She holds a dual bachelor's degree of psychology and Chicano studies from Scripps College in Claremont, and has also had extensive leadership development and training, including at the Stanford University Graduate School. She has a passion for building and supporting community networks, leadership in action, and solution-based strategies. You're going to hear from her today. You will hear that passion too. Never last but least, but someone has to be last. The last picture is Helen Ewan Story, who's been involved in social and economic justice efforts and worked in outreach, advocacy, and nonprofit programs for over 30 years. She's been on staff at the Community Action Board since 2001, first as the program director of a non-traditional occupational training program for low-income women, then as the assistant director since 2013. She's also been a fellow in the Women's Foundation of California's Women's Policy Institute and a past chair of Santa Cruz County's nonprofit Human Care Alliance. She currently represents CAB on the Local Homeless Action Partnership on the Continuum of Care, something you all are familiar with probably on the local COCs. So it's an exciting group of presenters. We are delighted and very proud to have you with us today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our team.
Thank you, Lindley, and good morning, everyone. And thank you for, or good morning for us, good afternoon for those of you who are not on the West Coast. And thank you for joining us today. We are extremely excited to have this opportunity to share the work that we're doing in Santa Cruz County through the national partnership and the network. We are grateful for the opportunity, and we're excited about being able to share what we've been doing now in a little more deeper fashion for the last 4 years. And so with that, I want to just jump in and get us going. When we were approached, or actually we shared some of our work at the Region 9 RPIC conference a couple of months ago, and had the privilege to be there with Tiffany and some other national partners. And when I talked about the process that we did through our community action plan process, Tiffany made a comment to me. She said, you guys are doing some really good work, and our commitment at the partnership is to help elevate that work. Not thinking that 8 weeks later we would be on this national webinar. So I want to thank the team of the partnership for making this happen, and for allowing us to share our process through the community action plan assessment. So our desired outcomes for today's presentation is, we want to share how through a cultural humility and cultural wholeness model, we engage with our community to develop a more robust CAP plan. We want to share about the nuts and bolts of what that process was. How was it different for us? How was it new for us? And why was it important for us to change the process and help support a shift in narrative around poverty in our community? We wanted to share with you what our county's poverty snapshot looked like because we changed the process, what was different in our snapshot. We absolutely want to share the critical role of partnerships in our community locally. As you all know, as a community action agency, we cannot do this work alone. We cannot do this heavy lifting alone in thinking about poverty and the impacts of poverty in our community. And we wanted to highlight in this community action plan process what we did with our University of California, Santa Cruz partnerships specifically, and hopefully inspire you to think about who might be some partners to help you in your process. And then lastly, what did we do with this information? How do we operationalize this information? How do we embrace this information that was so critically important and sacred, right? The community told us things that we hold and honor in a sacred space. And what is our responsibility? What do we do with that information? And so we wanted to wrap up our part of the conversation looking at internally and externally what are some actions that our board took and our community is doing that help support how we bridge to equity locally. Next slide, please. A little bit about us. We existed just like many of you. We were born in 1965, and our mission is to partner with the community to eliminate poverty and create social change through advocacy and essential services, holding the vision of a thriving, equitable, and diverse community free from poverty and injustice. And I can tell you that everybody who is associated to this agency holds that vision and believes that we can make it, we can materialize it, we can help manifest it. That is part of the passion that drives the work that we do locally. And then lastly, our values, which are the foundation of who we are, the spirit of who we are, and the soul of who we are as an agency. We value equity, dignity, and diversity, service, community action, and inclusion. We serve on an average over 7,000 people annually through our 4 service areas. And you can see on our slide, our 4 service areas are homelessness, prevention and intervention services, our youth and adult employment programs, including, we believe, one of the few day worker center which provides job matches for our day worker community. And day workers are folks who stand outside, for example, Home Depot or the lumber store to get day labor work. We created a center so that all work would be dignified, wages would be dignified, and that people would be treated with respect. And so we're a job matching a program for the Day Worker Center. I think we might be maybe one or two, or if not the only Day Worker Center under the Community Action Partnership umbrella. Our immigration services in this county are extremely important and popular. We have offered immigration services for over 20 years in our community. And our newest initiative, the Thriving Immigrants Initiative, which we'll be talking about in Puerto Rico, it is about creating support and a network of response for our immigrants who are vulnerable and at risk of deportation and or separation of families. And so we're excited to have the opportunity to tell you a little bit more about what we're doing locally with that initiative in Puerto Rico in January. And then lastly but not least is our community building and youth development work centered at our Davenport Resource Service Center, which is we are right now physically in Watsonville, which is the south tip of Santa Cruz County. Our city of Santa Cruz is the northern tip or the northern middle space of the county, and Davenport is our furthest northern tip, a beautiful little community that has about 300 folks who live there, with about 250 farm worker families who live around the town, who pick primarily Brussels sprouts, who supply the world with Brussels sprouts, and farm worker families who are impacted by poverty, who come to the center for support, and we go to them for support and services and information. And so that gives you a little bit of who we are and the services that we provide here in our local county. Next slide, please. Really quickly, so we were created in '65, incorporated in '77 as a nonprofit agency. Like many of you, we have 15-member tripartite board with the 3 components: low income and government and private sector. We have a little bit of over 40 staff across the county. We have a budget that's over $4 million. And like you, we conduct our community action plan every 2 years. I wanted to share, so just to give you a little bit of context of where we are geographically, we're on the Central Coast. Not in the Central Valley, but on the Central Coast, and so we literally are, 3 miles in Watsonville from the beach. Our county has a population of a little bit over 250,000, with Watsonville in the South County area having a little bit over 55,000 people. What you might know us best for, I would assume that those of you who are watching, we are known for Martinelli's sparkling cider that is made in Watsonville, California, and distributed worldwide. And so this holiday, while you're drinking your sip of sparkling cider, please think of Santa Cruz County and send us good vibes. Next slide, please. So with that, we started our community action plan process on the notion that we wanted to change the conversation. Our board wanted to value the work that we have been doing and engaging in the community, but felt like we wanted to push ourselves a little bit more and get into a more robust process. And understanding what that meant for us in our community is understanding that cultural humility and respect needed to be part of this inclusive model of community engagement. We wanted to push beyond traditional data collection and needs assessment, and we wanted to involve, engage, and more importantly, reinforce the relationships that we as an agency have with those who are unheard and sometimes invisible in our community. We wanted to expand our view from a needs and deficit focus to include community-identified assets, resources, and networks as part of the community's self-identified solutions to poverty. That was so critically important for us. We decided, we knew that we have this model that we have to abide with as part of community action, but we wanted to push it a little bit further and not only look at the needs and the gaps, but look at the assets of the community of those that we serve, and felt it so passionately about it that we included it in our report. We knew that our state report didn't ask for it, but we have, for the last 2 rounds, captured the data and included it into our state report. And we want to invite and challenge those 76 of you who are watching us today to think about that. It takes a little bit of thought and process, but the value of assessing the community and including that which makes our community rich and diverse, and help use that information to figure out solutions for poverty, and to do it collectively with our community. Next slide, please. And so here we are. We knew we needed to do this process. We were happy with how we had done it in the past, but we wanted to do it bigger and bolder and in respect to the community that we served. And that doesn't just happen overnight. We needed some steps of preparation to get us there. And I will tell you that this process was about 85% board-led. Thank you to the CAB board and to those folks who volunteered to be on all of our boards. We can't do this work without you. And specifically in our agency, there's no way we could have done this community action plan process without the full commitment and support and endorsement and participation of our board members. And so part of that, so I wanted to share that because that was the driver. The board recommended for us to change the process. We wanted to look at how to reinforce and connect with our community in a different way. And how we had traditionally done it is, we would sit at the Board of Supervisors facility or our City Council facility, and, as part of the surveys and client satisfaction and all the things that we do, we did town hall meetings, and our board would sit behind the podiums or the stand, and people would come up to the podium. And our board members said, we're not comfortable with that layout. We don't want to be elevated away from the community that we're listening to. Let's figure out other ways to do it. And Eva will be sharing in more detail of what that looked like for us. We knew that we wanted to dig deeper with racial equality and understanding systemic oppression, and so we engaged with our Santa Cruz County Community Collaborative to overcome racism, our SCORE partners, and our board and our staff, and we invited leaders that we work with to a training around cracking the codes. How does systemic oppression exist, and how can we move through it and make it better make a change and a shift in those systems? We engaged with Nina Simon, who was our local Museum of Art and History Executive Director, who wrote a book called The Art of Relevance, and it was so timely for us because that book really focused on the insiders and the outsiders and the outliers, and how do those layers of a community connect to each other, how do we engage with each other. And so that was part of our preparation. Some of us read the book, some of us listened to her speaking, some of us engaged with her to understand that as a model in moving forward. We engaged with UCSC Blum Center, and again, Eva will talk a little bit more about that for facilitation, training, and skills building. Because it was board-led, we wanted our board to have their skills and their skill set, understanding their critical role as the facilitators of this process. And last but not least, engaged with Sylvia's work with Sente Pensante. We took some assessments and had some conversations around leadership visioning, self-value identification, and cultural wholeness as an asset or solution in an equity framework. We had those, we engaged on both the board level, the leadership level, and the agency level, and held those conversations. All those to help us prepare in moving forward in this new process. And so I'm going to send it over to Silvia, who will be sharing a little bit about the Sente Pensante view of cultural wholeness and humility.
Good afternoon and good morning, everybody. My name is Silvia Austerlich. As Lindsay said, I'm on the board of CAB since 2016, and I am an intercultural facilitator. And what I'm going to share with you comes from years of studying and thinking and having conversations about these issues. It comes from my own immigrant experience. I'm from Argentina, from Buenos Aires, and I have lived in Santa Cruz since 1999. And also, I worked for 10 years in a local hospice, providing direct services to the Latino community, and that's where I got to learn, refine, and apply the model and the concepts that I will be sharing with you. So this is the model, what I call the organizational model of cultural wholeness, and for now I want to just call your attention to 3 main points. The first has to do with the understanding of culture, which is a very broad concept. And I want to say that when I talk about culture, it goes beyond ethnicity. Really, every family has a culture, every organization has a culture. So you will hear more about this, but really culture is in a way the lenses through which we see ourselves, others, and the world. There's a quote by Anais Nin that says, "We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are." So, and that's why self-reflection around our own cultural identity is so important. So the 3 main points of this model for now are, 1, an understanding of culture as an iceberg. You know, in the iceberg, there's the surface culture, which is what we see and what we know, and there's below the surface, that is what we do not see, what's unspoken, what's unconscious, what's unknown. And that is true about our own culture and about the culture of the people we serve. So that's 1 point. The second point has to do with dimensions. The model presents 3 dimensions. The surface culture, there's the dimension of cultural competence that applies to the services and to leadership, cultural competence. And then below the surface, there is what I call the relationship of service between service provider and the client, family, community that we serve. And for that, the language that the model introduces is cultural humility for the service provider and cultural dignity for the people we serve. So that's the second. And the third point, it's value systems, that the model introduces and makes a distinction between 2 value systems, the value system of progress that applies to professional roles, and the value system of care that applies to the human connection, and that it becomes critical in terms of issues of social justice and really to thinking about assets. So that's what I'm going to say about the model. Next slide, please. So these are the definitions that you can read at your own time, but in my words, I'm going to say that cultural competence has to do with a framework and skills to navigate efficiently and effectively around different cross-cultural situations. Cultural humility has to do, it's a stance for providers to become a student of the people we serve instead of being the expert of the people, becoming a student, learning from them, with them, and about them. And cultural dignity is a term that I'm coining, I think. And I think that it's important to add cultural to dignity because many times I have heard the word dignity, but cultural dignity implies that it's the dignity of the person in their own context. It's not just dignity, but understanding and honoring the people and their journey and what they have been through and where they are coming from. So that's the definition. Next slide, please. And the more I think about these days, about what's going on in our world and really social justice issues, the more I think about, the importance of comparing and actually distinguishing between these two value systems, the value system of progress, and that applies to services and more a business perspective or a management perspective, and value system of care that applies to the relationship of service and more a relational perspective. And just to name some of the values, value system of progress has to do with, really it has to do with profit, financial success, proficiency, problem solving, productivity, competition, authority. And the other value system has to do more with what makes what helps dignify a person, right? Listening to them, personal growth, creating a trusting relationship, creating trust and safety. So as I said that, in reflecting about social justice this morning, I was thinking that really the social justice conversation and the struggle has to be grounded more and more in the value system of care. And also the issue of assets that we are going to discuss later, to really see what assets low-income communities bring to the table in terms of community development. It really needs the values of care. And also part of my language when thinking about, low-income communities or the more at-risk or vulnerable, I like to talk about from at-risk to at-promise. What's that journey, and how can we as service providers and agencies can help provide that context of dignity where their potential becomes an asset. Next slide, please. So then in terms of the relationship of service, which I'm presenting as a relationship between service providers and the community that we serve, I think that this slide comes from an article and a distinction that's presented by Rachel Naomi Remen, and she talks about helping, fixing, and serving. And I'm connecting the helping and fixing with the values of progress and serving with the values of care. So, helping comes from a place of strength, and we help others who are weaker. And that really creates a relationship of inequality in a way, right? Again, from the experience of me being stronger. And with fixing is a little different and similar, right? Like fixing comes from a place of expertise, and we fix those who are broken. And that also creates judgment and inequality. And even though, there's a criticism in a way or a judgment, and yet those are important, right? Helping and fixing are important, but they are not enough. And in particular, to create dignity and for the at-promise to become an asset. So the service in these terms, the first thing has to do with really being able to see everyone as whole and to have a personal connection there. So there's an experience of mutuality, not of being the strongest or being the expert, but being connected. So cultural humility in a way invites more of that serving as a dimension that really creates connection, inclusivity, and belonging, and that it's what makes the difference and what makes possible the at-risk to at-promise or broken to whole. So that's all I have to say for now, and I think that I'm passing the torch to Eva. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And as we pick up with the next slide with Eva Bertram, I'd like to encourage folks to put any comments they have or any questions you might have for our presenters into the chat box. We'll take most of them at the end, but if there are points to clarify along the way, we do want to do that, and I can collate questions as we move through the presentation.
Thank you. I'm Eva Bertram, and as Lindley mentioned, I'm a board member for Santa Cruz's Community Action Board and a faculty member at the University of California, Santa Cruz, UCSC. And I want to turn now to the specific process we use, to some of the nuts and bolts, to explain how we drew on the principles and the values that Sylvia just articulated to develop a different approach to the needs assessment, in particular for our most recent community action plan. As Marielena mentioned, traditionally, CAB in Santa Cruz has compiled its community action plans by surveying those who've used our services, by holding public hearings, by reviewing data gathered locally. And every time we did this, we learned some things. But this time we wanted to do it a little bit differently. We wanted to generate a more robust, deeper, and honest conversation about poverty in our community, one that included voices that are not normally heard. And that included those less likely to attend public hearings or to ever reach the microphone if they did attend. Those less likely to receive, or if they did receive, not submit surveys. Those less likely even to be counted. And we wanted to design a more meaningful process of community engagement. We wanted as well to assess and address the issue of poverty here in Santa Cruz County using an equity framework. And equity for us in this sense means doing more than trying to equalize resources and opportunities, as important as that is. Equity involves taking into account differences in the lived experiences, in the historical conditions of various groups confronting poverty. And Sylvia is going to speak to this, this notion of equity a little bit later. So CAB concluded that to do this would mean listening more closely to those in the community and identifying needs and priorities as they were expressed by those most affected. And we knew this would mean digging deeper, identifying different strategies, being willing to experiment. That was the goal, and really it's an ongoing process for us. It hasn't ended. It really just launched us in a new direction. What it meant concretely was beginning a series of poverty conversations to inform our community action plan. And these were conducted by the CAB staff and board with the critical help of our partners. Next slide, please. For the needs assessment and research process, one of the most important partners we had was the Blum Center. And the UCSC Blum Center is part of a network of centers working on poverty across all 10 University of California campuses. Here at UCSC, Blum's community-engaged research efforts bring together students, faculty, nonprofit leaders, others in the community. I'm fortunate to serve on Blum's advisory board, and I want to give a quick shout out to the director of the Blum Center, Heather Bullock, and to Aaron Toulis, who coordinated much of this work as a graduate student with Blum, and we're hoping that both are on this webinar. In our CAP process, the Blum Center really lent expertise at various points along the way, helping to design interview questions, for example, training note takers and data gatherers, helping us code and analyze the results that we collected. And this research assistance was tremendously helpful in our case. But for other agencies considering doing something similar, we'd encourage you to find research partners in your area whenever possible. Could be a community college, could be a nonprofit research institute. But at the same time, keep in mind that you can be your own research center in carrying out these assessments. That is, you can do a version, certainly, of what we've described here, even without any access to additional resources. So what was the process? Next slide, please. There were 4 key strategies, and the first 2 were innovations for us. We held a series of listening circles on poverty. So our board went through a process of reflection and discussion that really took some time to identify the groups in our community whose voices were important but unheard. And we identified groups, including day laborers and farm workers and seniors and immigrants and more. And we arranged focus group type conversations with members from each group in these listening circles, in which a trained facilitator led the group through a series of questions. Note takers were there to capture the conversations and the issues and the themes that were raised. And the advantage of these listening circles is that they allowed for a collective process of reflection and interaction between members of these communities. And about what they shared with us had to do with the deeper experience of poverty, their sense of the needs and the strengths and assets of each community group. We did a total of 11 listening circles. And we supplemented these, secondly, with what we called pop-up poverty conversations. These were walk-up interview sites in which our team of facilitators and note-takers would go to where people are rather than have them come to us. And this meant going to various locations in the county, like outside the Immigration Support Center, at a soup kitchen, at a school district conference for parents, at a food distribution site for farm workers, etc. We did 9 pop-ups total. And a quick side note here, some of the tools that we used, like the list of questions that we asked in the listening circles and the pop-ups, are available. If you're interested, you'll see the link in our report and website on the last slide of the presentation, and you can access that information there if it's helpful to you. And in addition to these outreach events, we did surveys of our clients and partners and a public forum. So these were our 3rd and 4th strategies. Next slide, please. All told, we reached more than 400 people, including members of these priority groups listed here, which, as I mentioned, our board had identified. I want to point out that several of the groups were Spanish-speaking. Several of the listening circles and the pop-up conversations were Spanish-speaking, which we considered essential to accurately capturing what's happening in our community, what the needs and the assets were. And the key I'd add to setting up these conversations, we learned, was to partner with local leaders in each group who were respected and trusted by members of that particular community. Some were advocates, some were service providers, some were religious leaders, some were activists. Our aim was to be invited in to the discussion, to the conversation by these community leaders. And this is really what made it possible for us to have real conversations in which community members shared their experience and their insights with us openly. And the results of all these conversations were then noted or transcribed and coded and analyzed, again with the help of the Blum research team. The goal was to ensure that their voices, the voices of these groups listed here, would inform our community action plan in a genuine and authentic way. And I'm going to stop there and turn this back to Helen now to discuss what we learned, what our findings were from this process.
Us today. I'm Helen Ewan-Story. I'm the Assistant Director for the Community Action Board, and I've been with CAB for about 18 years now. So as Eva was saying, we heard from diverse voices in our community. And what they told us when we asked them, why does poverty exist in our community and what are the causes? We came up with 5 top need areas. I think some of these are going to be similar to many of us in the network, which include jobs, higher wages, consistent employment. We have a lot of farm workers in our community and are very tourism-based, so there's a lot of seasonal work. And we know that there is truly the need for more consistent and higher wage employment in our community, and we heard that loudly and clearly from the voices that we spoke with. Similarly, housing insecurity and high rent burden, which is defined as spending over 30% of your monthly income on rent, 60% of those we spoke to had a high rent burden. So it's very extreme in our community, and I'm sure it is also a top need for many of you in the network. We also heard from those we spoke to about their needs for health care, and that included physical, mental, substance abuse, support, as well as basic needs such as food. And so I think those are things that are probably very universal for many of us in the network, as well as barriers to accessing resources. We heard loudly and clearly from those we spoke to that there were barriers around childcare, transportation, education, documentation status, language barriers, things like barriers around credit or criminal records, things like that were barriers to accessing resources. But I think really importantly, and a first time for us, is that because of who we spoke to and how we spoke with them, we heard for the very first time that the impact of discrimination, prejudice, and stereotypes were also one of the top impact areas, creating and impacting the experience of poverty in our community. And over half, so about 53% of those who we spoke to identified racial and ethnic discrimination and prejudice as the cause of that discrimination. So we know those are driving factors, and as I said, I've been with Community Action Board for over 18 years, and in my experience, that particular area has never been identified in that direct sort of level. And I think it really speaks to what we did differently with this process this time. Can I have the next slide, please? So some of the specific messages we heard from those we spoke to for decision makers included: we need more low-income housing, provide jobs locally.
Necesitamos planes de desarrollo más justos. We need development plans that are more just, que sean influenciados por las realidades del pueblo y no por las políticas, to please be influenced by the realities of our people and not by the politics.
Right, which also speaks to the next comment, which is all that's happening now politically is affecting our children. They are scared and stressed. We heard that from many, many of those we spoke with. And we were doing this in 2016, 2017, after some major changes for us nationally. We also heard specifically about creating alliances between voters and those who cannot vote. And then, if I can have the next slide. Importantly, as we've been talking about and building upon, we asked about what are strengths and resources in the community that help you fight against poverty. So what we heard from our community in terms of asset areas were community, family, social networks, and pride. Those are things that sustain our community members when they're in need, what are networks that they turn to, and it really is about family and those community networks, neighborhood networks that they are connected to. The second top asset area was services in the community. So at the same time, we've had this discussion that a need area has been access to services, and so there's obviously barriers to some of the services, but there's a lot of strength in the services that do exist in our community. We're a small community, but we're an active and engaged community, and we have a strong nonprofit sector and network, and so the services that are in the community are heavily relied upon by those in poverty and appreciated as a strength and a resiliency source. Our number 3 top asset area was spiritual and relational wealth. And that was really defined as those faith-based networks that folks belong to and tap into. And I think, again, this speaks to how we did this differently in our community this time. We had, as Eva spoke about, we had so many different listening circles, pop-up poverty conversations. Some of those were in faith-based communities, and so the strength of those networks for folks really shone through in terms of an asset area. And then last but not least was the knowledge of legal rights and services. And so as Marilena explained earlier in our webinar, one of our main services at CAB, which is a resource in the community, is our immigration legal services, our immigration project. Of the over 7,000 people a year that we saw last year, over 6,000 of them access our immigration services. And so it's significant. That, along with things like legal aid in our community and other legal service providers, are critical to folks and are a strength and, again, a resiliency factor dealing with poverty in our community. If I can have the next slide, please. So what you see is, rather than what used to be a linear list of only needs in our community, really blossomed into what we have called our needs and assets flower. And this has been our guide as we're moving the work forward. It really helps us paint a deeper snapshot of poverty and resiliency in our community. And I will now turn it back over to Sylvia.
I think we have a challenge. I think perhaps you're muted on the phone.
Oh, okay. Yes, well, to talk about assets, and as I was saying at the beginning, I think that it's really important to ground the concept of asset in both value systems, not only progress, but care, right? And that dignifying environment in which low-income communities and individuals can really start realizing that there's a potential in every human being, and it's really important that we all reach out from that place to participate in our communities, from that place of having something to contribute. So there's the notion of asset that has guided me and CAB really, I think, comes from a report by the Ford Foundation. It's called Building Assets to Reduce Poverty and Injustice. And there's a little bit of a teaching here. It's called Beyond Fishing. It comes from the Kenya Community Development Foundation, and they wrote in describing their philosophy that if you give a man a fish, it will satisfy the hunger today, but tomorrow, of course, they will be hungry and they will depend, right, on the people who are giving them fish. So then we teach them to fish. But this will solve the problem until someone pours toxic waste, which these days is happening a lot to our environment, right? So then what? He needs to be empowered to sustainably control all those factors which affect their ability to fish. So then they say, we want to go beyond fishing, building the capacity of the fishermen by helping them gain access and increase control over resources to which they have a right. For this, they will require vision, information, learning, appropriate technology, linkages, organization, resources, and an enabling environment. So this is the Sentipensante invitation and challenge to, and a question whether really we can envision a more liberating role for social services and for service providers to become that enabling environment. Besides the service delivery itself, can services like CAB and community action agencies provide dignifying service relationships that enhance the connection and where low-income communities may develop and access that vision, information, technology, and resources? So next slide, please. So then the equity approach, it requires a combination of the cultural humility, which is that stance of providers, and I think that CAB as an agency has really embraced and is really walking the talk of cultural humility, and political courage. And I want to read a quote by Krishnamurti, a Hindu philosopher, that says, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And I think that it takes political courage to name what is not working. And I think that, you know, the deficit-based models of poverty are not working anymore. I think that we need to move beyond that, because that really perpetuates poverty by saying, these are the people who are the problem, the poor, and they need the rich people who can help them, who have the solutions. And I think that that's not working anymore, and we need to envision alternatives that bring together, you know, like everybody to the table and to innovate and to take the risk and to really embrace the not knowing of this moment and change ourselves to change the process. Next slide. Thank you. So this is then the social justice conversation, and it requires, again, you know, to ground ourselves in values of care and progress, and not to see, again, you know, the poverty as a problem to be solved, but as a condition to be changed, because we are in this together. And I think that the first step is to change ourselves and to challenge the mindset through which we approach the work of you know, alleviating and hopefully ending poverty. And then from changing ourselves, we can change the conversation and to bring different language from at risk to at promise, and to start really and dignifying, you know, everybody involved in the struggle and in this work. And then we can change the process, which is what CAP has done, and we are doing it and changing the world, right, from this perspective. So thank you. Next slide for, I think, Maria Elena. Yes?
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, Sylvia. This slide is an important one because this is our community action invitation to our partners, to our anchor agencies that we work with, and to the systems that we're involved with. This is the so what, right? So what? You know, what we've learned. Where is our responsibility, and what can we do to take the next step with what we've learned? And how do we ensure, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, you know, the information that we gather from our community is sacred. They trust us with the information, and they trust us to do something about it, with it. And so this is our community invitation to those of you who participate in a community action process, is to think about, alignment, right? Can we seek alignment and collaborate with equity building initiatives? I would imagine, like across California, through our statewide association, CalCAPA, through our regional partnership, we've all identified equity as one of the core commitments for our work. I would imagine it might be the same across the nation. I would hope that it is the same across the nation. And so what is our role as community action agencies to name equity as a priority, as a value, and to think about how it is inserted and integrated into the very core of who we are as community servants. Building equity, building equity, create and support the conditions to help advance equity. And that's, those seem like really easy words to you know, in the green bubble. And it's probably the biggest challenge we're seeing as a nation, right? And I want to offer that without the baby step, you know, there's a saying, how do you eat an elephant? Well, you eat it one bite at a time, right? And so how do we deal with this big picture and conversation around equity? To me, the first bite is self-reflection and community and organizational assessment around equity, and the honest reflection and conversation around who we are as an agency. And do we reflect the community that we serve? Does our board reflect the community that we serve? Does our management team reflect the community that we serve? Does our frontline staff reflect the community that we serve? Because for us, that very essential first bite will lead to a successful ingestion of the elephant. But without that first step, we cannot have integrity in the following steps. And so I invite us to ask the questions to ourselves first. How do we personally hold equity? What does it mean to us as individuals who create the system of community action? And then how does our agency and how does our statewide efforts and how do our national efforts embrace it? Not easy to do that kind of self-reflection, but we absolutely have to do it to do this work. And create the action steps needed to gain that, to get us closer, right? And then C, connection to the community. Draw and build on community input and take steps to support and grow community engagement in all processes. So I was invited to St. Louis by our chief of probation to share how we talk about community engagement in our juvenile justice system. And when they introduced me, I giggle about it. They introduced me as being a community agitator. And I giggle about it. That's not a bad thing, right? But what that reflected back to me is I'm doing my job. If I'm asking the questions, if I'm making us a little uncomfortable, if I'm sharing examples of how our agency and our board do hold equity, and it might be a little uncomfortable. And if we're challenging systems or we're part of we're being asked to be in action around community solutions, being an agitator isn't a bad thing. And sharing what our commitment to community engagement is and what our board, the courage that our board had to take those steps, to do it differently after 55 years, that's what it took for us. And so this is our community action invitation to the 79 of you who are logged in with us today, is to think about alignment, to think about building equity and working through the self-reflection of what that means. And then how do we connect with the community and teach our system, our strategies, our successes, and asking our questions in a broader way. Next slide, please. And so this next slide is the examples of what we've done with this work, right? And so we've learned, we've been through this process, we've learned new things, we've engaged with the community in a different way. And so what does that lead to? What are the bites of that elephant that were created because of this work? And I wanted to give our network really tangible ideas and examples of what we've done and what we are continuing to do. And I'm telling you, this is the scratching of the surface. This was the beginning of opening the door in a different way. Here's some examples. Our CAB board adopted a practice that the chair position of the board would be 2 co-chairs, and 1 co-chair will always represent the community of color that we serve. Now that sounds pretty easy, and it's bold in our community. Understanding, this is based on an understanding that community demographics changes. And so right now, I should be the Executive Director of Community Action Board of Santa Cruz County. I'm a Latina. I'm native to this community. I'm born and raised in this community. My father and my parents, my mother was an immigrant. My father, worked was a farm worker in his early life. And so I should be the Executive Director of Community Action Board of Santa Cruz County because I reflect the community that we serve. But tomorrow, if the demographics change in this community, then I need to step back and I should not be the executive director of this agency. And so it takes that kind of honesty and that kind of understanding of our roles as community action people, that sometimes it's about stepping back. And so this board practice will ensure that there will always be the voice of the community of color that we serve, regardless of what that community of color is and how it changes in our future and with our demographics. Our CAB board also felt that it was critically important to develop a health seat on the board because health rose to the top of one of our needs in our community. We wanted to create a direct response to that, and our board approved and created a health seat to respond to that need in our community, and we're really excited about that. Our board being that nimble to be able to move that quickly for us. We endorsed a countywide nonprofit wage equity campaign because we understood and heard loud and clear how difficult it is, how people were holding multiple jobs, how people were holding part-time jobs, how there wasn't a pathway for reasonable wages for folks. We got involved with our local equity campaign because of our community action plan. We became involved in and and in many instances are leading community-wide equity conversations. We're participating in community assessments on bias and organizational capacity building. And so we've linked to other efforts in the community around equity and around organizational bias and capacity building in this area. We have focused growth in 2 of our service areas, immigration services and homeless and housing services, as dictated and directed by our community action plan process. And also I want to share that our CAB board approved, we have policy statements in various areas, and they took on, our advocacy committee of the board took on our policy statement on immigration, equity, and human rights, and made it bold and made it beautiful and made it stronger than we've had in the past. And I think that's available to you through our website if you're interested in seeing what that is. And that guides our work in the area of immigration. And lastly, but not least, we decided to ensure that we aligned our CAP plan results with local initiatives, including the county's strategic plan. And that's through our county administrator's office, and also what we call locally collective results indicators of well-being, and that's our core process, and that is our county process of how funds are distributed through the service providers across the county, and equity being the foundation and the basis of that work. And so those are some examples of local and internal CAB actions, and Helen is going to talk a little bit about broader actions and recommendations for our county and beyond.
Right. Yeah, so those broad actions and recommendations for our county and beyond include identifying policies that elevate our local response to poverty, including participate in the California statewide work to eliminate deep poverty in 4 years. It also includes supporting the diversification in all levels of local leadership, and this includes boards of directors, county and city commissions and councils, and agency management and department management in nonprofit and jurisdictional departments. Really, as Marlena was saying, to make sure that all of those levels of leadership reflect the composition of the communities they serve. Also, the continuing momentum for the 2020 census link to local, statewide, association, and national partnership efforts. I think we all know and appreciate how critical supporting a complete census count is to funding and representation that's tied to the census. And the alignment to local and statewide efforts, and these include exploring universal basic income as an anti-poverty strategy, recognizing the impacts between environment, climate change, and poverty, which impacts those in poverty at such a deeper level when we have these kind of climate change and environmental change issues. Continuing to support the Earned Income Tax Credit, the EITC, that so many of us support and work on, as a research-based anti-poverty strategy. And then, of course, as Marlena was talking a little bit in the previous slide, about supporting and investing in wage equity across sectors. And again, for us, we are a nonprofit. Our base in this work is starting with looking at the nonprofit sector, because we know that both locally and regionally, so many nonprofit workers are living in or just above poverty. And that's something that we know we need to look at in terms of equity and a broader view.
Next slide, please.
So I actually am so caught up in thinking about that.
And so, that concludes kind of the nuts and bolts of our presentation. But we wanted, I wanted to end our piece, first of all, in hopefully that this sharing of our information can help you think about your community action plan process and what might you do differently. What's your little bite of the elephant that might dig a little deeper to the communities that we serve, right? What's the little bite of the elephant that will give you information that maybe your agency didn't have before? And we want to encourage you and challenge you to think about that. I want to encourage you and challenge you to think about including assets in your assessment. And even though your state doesn't ask for it, sending them as part of your report. We have to shift the narrative and the conversation and support the assets as solutions, as the steps towards solutions to eliminating poverty in our community. And our process, our 55-year-old process in our community action assessment plan, action plan process, it might be time to add it. And the way to do that is for us to initiate that conversation in our local state efforts. And lastly, I just want to express my gratitude and acknowledge how hard the Community Action Network works. I know how hard we work. I know how hard our board works. I know how hard our partnership works because we have to, because we hold the responsibility very seriously to make change and make life better and help support people impacted by poverty. And we do this work with love, and we do this work with light and commitment. And so I want to express my gratitude to those partners who do the work with us. And to Lindley and Tiffany and Amy from the National Partnership, we are extremely grateful to have had this opportunity to share this work. Thank you so much.
Well, we are the ones who are delighted to be showcasing this. We do have a few questions that have come in. So I'm going to pitch the Maria Elena to you, and you decide if you want to call out someone else on your team to respond to that. So first, around the pop-up conversations, can you share a little bit about how you disclose the purpose behind them? And were there any opt-in processes or questions as these were being presented to people literally on the street?
What was the last part of that question, Lily?
Were there any opt-in processes or questions when you presented these to people on the street? How did you start those conversations? How did you tell people what you were doing?
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to do?
Well, yeah.
So those are really good questions, and so I'm going to let me start off, and then I'm going to invite anybody in the panel to jump in. So as Eva described, we wanted to go to natural environments, right? We wanted to blend in, to be a part of, and to build relationship with the folks we wanted to engage with. And so we had tools, right? We had a display board that was depending on the language, right, that was in the language that it needed to be in. We had the facilitators or the pop-up team reflective of the community that we were speaking to in many cases, and we wanted to make sure that there was the language was taken care of in those spaces. And so it really was, in my opinion, and the panelists might have a different opinion, it felt very easy for us. We had a relationship, and we were invited to come into that group. For example, I'm thinking of, one of our pop-ups was in partnership with the Center for Farm Worker Families, where we met with 300 Indigenous farm workers, mostly from Oaxaca, to have this conversation. And we were doing it in their distribution and resource kind of space. And so we literally introduced ourselves and talked to people who were in line waiting for some distribution of resources that the Center of Farm Worker Families was producing, and we were engaging as people, were waiting to in line. And so it was about, it's that humility piece. That here I am, and this is who I am. I want to know who you are, and having that connection with folks. And so it felt easy to me personally, because there was already a relationship with those entities, with that community. I don't know if that helped or not, but.
Yeah, and I'll just share that one of the pop-up poverty conversations I was at a parent conference through our local school district. And so the parents were at almost an all-day conference where they went to a variety of different workshops. And then at the end of the day, we were there with other service providers in a resource fair. And so as Marilena said, we had our display board, we had the questions posted, we had little envelopes underneath them, we had some pictures to kind of stimulate some conversation. And then we actually, myself and a few others, including some of our UCSU students and Heather Bullock and team from the Blum Center, approached parents, and we talked to them. We let them know. We said, we're the Community Action Board, and we're undertaking our new Community Action Plan process. Mm-hmm. And we'd like to hear from you about, we really boiled it down for the pop-up poverty conversations. We had the 3 questions. Tell us, and we had little cards that we were writing on, mm-hmm. and we said, what is poverty, what are the causes of poverty in our community? What's impacting you in poverty in this community? And we wrote those things down. What strengths and resources do you rely on to help, be resilient through poverty? So we took those answers down. And what important messages do you have for local leaders about understanding poverty in this community? And I will tell you that it was a wonderful process. I spoke to probably 20 parents and wrote those the comments down. And some folks, you would talk to them about that, and they kind of look at you. I think the level of engagement on this it's so rare that people are asked these questions. And they were really honored. The folks that we talked to were so honored to be asked to contribute, to be asked their opinion about these things. And so it was a really organic and respectful process. And we let them know at that time, these answers, everything that you're letting us know, will be put together and be part of our community action plan on poverty in this community. It will be represented to local leaders. It's going to go to the state of California. Mm-hmm. So we really let them know why we were doing it and what the impacts were. And it was a wonderful and very collaborative process.
Eva and Sylvia, did you want to add anything to that?
So I think that you covered it really nicely in terms of the pop-up conversations. A couple of things we really went. We were very careful to make clear that we would honor people's confidentiality and anonymity, which was particularly important for some of the people in our community who are undocumented. And that also made it easier, I think, for people to speak openly and frankly. The other thing I'd say is that we spent a lot of time coming up with questions and images that we would share with people. And there was, as Helen mentioned, a shorter set of those for the pop-ups than for the listening circles. But it really took time to think through what would elicit a really deep and sort of honest engagement. And what we learned, I think, in the process, too, was that once we had that list, some of those questions landed really well with certain individuals or certain groups, and others not so well, and so on. But overall, we learned a tremendous amount, including taking the time to ask in a very direct way about assets. What are the strengths and resources in your community in addressing these kinds of problems? And if people paused for just a second, and they had so much to share. And it was a real eye-opener, I think, for us to see how much we could learn from asking that question, in addition to the more common question, which is, does poverty exist and what are the causes of it? I remember in one listening circle, this was not a pop-up, but it was a listening circle, that one man in the circle who had been quite quiet through most of the discussion, when asked the question, what are the strengths in this community, he just opened up and said, what we have is conscience. We're rich inside. We have values. And what we have to do is figure out how to help the community make power so they can make pressure using those values. And it was so extraordinarily eloquent and important for us to hear and for us to take to others in our community, including our elected officials, and incorporate into the community action plan.
Incredibly
Thank you.
helpful.
Thank you. If I can just add one more piece, and then we'll move on to the next question. What I thought, my recollection and what sparked light in me is how people responded to, what do you want decision makers to know? What is your message to our decision makers? We're going to take the messages back, and we're going to talk to them. What do you want them to know based on your experience? That was powerful. Yeah. Everybody had something to say. Everybody wanted that connection to their decision maker. Everybody had something to a question or a comment or a thought, a passionate question, comment, or thought that they wanted to get to their decision makers. And so I wanted to highlight that because I think that was an important part of our strategy to reinforce to the folks that we talked to that we were committed to take it back. Right.
The power of being heard, truly being heard, and listened to in an active way, it sounds like has been at the core of everything that you've done, and really gets to the heart of how you get to that true and real information, how you get folks to open up. Speaking of how you get folks to open up, we did have a question about, are there available, would you share samples of the tools that you use to help recognize those needs and assets? And I'm seeing a lot of head nodding on the screen, and we can gather and forward those in a follow-up to this webinar for folks who are on, if that is in fact something that you can share with us.
Sure, we can share. If you look on this slide at the bottom is the link to our community action plan on our website. If you look in the appendix of that report, you'll be able to see the questions and the tools. And we would be happy to send over that link to Lindley to get out to the partnership if we need to.
That would be great. We're actually going to be sending out the PowerPoint. It's going to be posted alongside the recording of the session. So great to know that it's in the appendices. I will say that I read the report, but I didn't have enough time to get into the appendices. So those are there. A last question, since we've woven some of the others in, is one participant asked if you are familiar with Morgan Simon's book, Real Impact, and if and how that has impacted your work on examining values and processes that work to support values.
I am not familiar with Morgan's work, but I want to reiterate the importance of the examination of values in the process and the work, right? That was the foundation. We understand that values fuel not only what we do, but more importantly, how we do it. And I wonder if Morgan is Nina's sister. It might be. So I don't personally have information about that, but does any of our panelists, Eva or Sylvia?
Well, and the reason I wanted to share it, in addition to that there may be another resource we can all learn from, which is always a good thing, was the specifics in the question about, I wanted to reiterate how your process really supports the work of your values. It both supports and furthers that work. And I think that is such an important piece of what you have shared today. We are delighted to be showcasing this work. As Maria Elena noted, we are going to be doing a session in San Juan, Puerto Rico at the Management and Leadership Training Conference, focusing on the work with the immigrant community that they have been doing. And we really are looking forward to showcasing that for the partnership afterward, perhaps in another engagement if we can get them back on the screen. Because this work is timely, it's necessary, and it supports our work and our promise of community action about making America a better place to live. As you all may know, we do have a self-driven site, Community Action Academy, Moodle with on-demand courses. There are some new courses posted. There are also census courses posted. And I want to call out, Eva, thank you for showcasing that and folks for mentioning it, how important the census is to the very communities we're talking about here. If we think back to the communities that CAB of Santa Cruz County really made an effort to get into with their listening circles and their pop-up, these are the same communities that are historically undercounted in censuses. And it is critical that community action engage. So there is census information there. We do have a complete count committee nationally, and you can find information for it on the Community Action Academy. There's a mobile app for that, so you can use it wherever you are as you commute. And of course, many of you already know or are registered for our conference in San Juan, Puerto Rico. This is the list of the team members who you saw pictures of on the first slide. We are also there to assist. And if you have follow-up questions for the team from Community Action Board of Santa Cruz County, we will be delighted to put you in contact and or to get answers to your questions. Maria Elena, Helen, Eva, Sylvia, we cannot thank you enough for sharing your expertise with us, for giving us the gift of time. Those of you on the webinar, we also know that time is the most precious resource you have. Grants aren't easy to come by, but time is something we can't write a proposal to get more of. So we are delighted to have you with us. We thank you for having stayed with us through this webinar, and we look forward to showcasing it to the rest of the network through the recording. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your week. And we care about the entire community, so we count the entire community.
Amen. Thank you.
With that, I'm going to stop the recording and end the session.